What they least expect will break them from within. There is always a moment, quiet, unnoticed, almost invisible, when the entire dynamic shifts. Not because you spoke, not because you fought, but because something inside you finally chose a different path. They don't see it coming. They never do. They're too invested in the version of you they crafted in their mind, predictable, reactive, always available. And that is exactly why the moment you stop playing that role becomes the moment that haunts them. The breaking doesn't happen in arguments or confessions. It happens in stillness, in that fragile second when your silence stops being surrender and starts becoming strength. Brother, this is where everything shifts. Because what truly destroys someone who took you for granted is not your anger. It's your evolution. The day you stop explaining yourself, the day you stop handing over your peace, the day you stop bleeding for someone who never noticed the wound, that is the day the ground beneath them begins to tremble. And they won't understand it at first. They replay messages, reread old conversations, search for clues they ignored. But nothing hits harder than realizing the person they thought they controlled has built a peace they can no longer disturb. That's the beginning of the unraveling, the one they never see coming. If you are or have been ignored, dismissed or taken for granted, and felt your worth tremble in the quiet, take this moment to anchor yourself. Like this video if you've ever felt unseen in a relationship. Comment, rising within. So, I know you're not just watching, you're awakening. Share this with a brother who's been carrying the same silent weight. Don't just consume this message, step into it. Start this journey now with Stoic Station, where silence becomes strength and strength becomes identity. Now let's go deeper into the moment everything changes. The moment your silence stops looking like weakness and starts becoming the thing that haunts them. Part 1. The shift they never saw. When silence stops being weakness. They never saw it coming. The exact moment your silence stopped looking like surrender and started becoming the thing that haunts them. Because the truth is brutal, brother. The quietest shift inside you is always the one that destroys them from within. It isn't loud, it isn't dramatic. It's the kind of shift that happens in a single breath. A moment so small they overlook it, and yet so powerful it rewrites the entire dynamic. For years you believed that explaining yourself made you stronger. You thought defending your intentions, clarifying misunderstandings, proving your heart over and over again would keep the relationship from falling apart. But all it did was train them to treat your voice like background noise. Something always there, something predictable, something easy to take for granted. And then it happens. That quiet moment before you respond, when something inside you whispers, "Don't do it this time." That whisper is not weakness. It is the beginning of sovereignty. It is your soul remembering its worth. But the war inside you is real. Part of you still wants to react, to fix, to reach out, to fight for understanding. Yet another part, the wiser part, knows that every explanation now is a step further away from your dignity. You want closeness, but every word you give them only widens the distance. And here's the part that stings. They only realized your value when the messages stopped, when your energy shifted, when the predictable version of you, the one who always responded, always soothed, always stayed, suddenly disappeared. Your silence didn't confuse them. It destabilized them. Because people feel powerful when they can predict you, and powerless when they can't. Stoicism teaches a simple truth. The strongest move is often the one you do not speak. Your silence becomes your stance. Your restraint becomes your shield. And the space between what rises to your tongue and what you swallow, that is where real strength is forged. You didn't stop talking because you were afraid. You stopped because you finally understood this. Your absence says what your words never could. And that silence, that shift, is the beginning of the psychological unraveling inside them. But what happens next when your absence begins to rewire their perception? That's the part they never see coming. Part 2. The unseen consequence. Your absence rewires their perception. They never anticipate the shift that happens the moment you step back. They expect anger, confrontation, maybe one last attempt to fix things. But not silence, not distance, not the quiet disappearance of your presence from their daily orbit. Because the truth they never see coming is this: it isn't your presence that changes them, it's your disappearance. The second you withdraw your energy, their entire emotional landscape begins to collapse in slow motion, even if they pretend not to feel it. People grow comfortable with your availability. They build their confidence around the assumption that you'll always be there to answer, to soothe, to validate, to show up whether they appreciate it or not. Your presence becomes a subconscious guarantee, the emotional safety net they never acknowledge but always rely on. But the moment you stop feeding that illusion, the moment the familiar warmth of your attention suddenly goes cold, their mind spirals into a place it hasn't visited in years: uncertainty. At first, they tell themselves you're just busy. They rationalize your silence with excuses that protect their ego. But curiosity eventually cracks through. They check your page. They watch your activity. They scroll. They analyze. They reread old conversations, not because they miss you yet, but because they're trying to locate the moment you changed. Then the memories they once brushed aside suddenly return. The warnings you expressed gently, the boundaries you tried to set, the moments of hurt they dismissed as emotional noise. Now, it isn't noise, it's evidence, and they don't know how to process it. Your absence doesn't merely create space, it creates pressure, a psychological pressure that pushes them back into every moment they took for granted, every message they ignored, every reassurance they demanded, every apology they expected. Your silence becomes the weight that forces them to see what they refused to look at before. And this is where the real psychological reversal begins. You are no longer the predictable giver. No longer the emotional supply, no longer the one who smooths the rough edges of their behavior. You become the missing piece that weighs more than your presence ever did. And here is the part that bruises their ego deeper than any argument ever could. They thought they held the power because they had your attention, but power was never in attention. It was in access. And now they don't have that anymore. They can't reach you in the same way. They can't predict you. They can't rely on you showing up the moment they snap their fingers. And the loss of access is the loss that breaks them. Your absence rewires everything. Their confidence shrinks as they begin questioning whether their assumptions about you and themselves were wrong. Their certainty fractures because the stability they once felt came from your consistent presence, not their own emotional strength. Their memory sharpens in all the wrong places, replaying things they once brushed aside, now searching for clues they failed to see. And what fills the space you left behind is not anger, not clarity, not strength, but doubt. The quiet kind. The kind that creeps in during the stillness of the night. The kind that eats at them when the room gets quiet, when their phone stays still, when the version of you they were so sure they understood begins to feel out of reach. Doubt, not loss, is the first consequence of your absence. But doubt is only the beginning, because soon that doubt becomes discomfort, and discomfort becomes fear. Not fear of losing you, but fear of realizing they never truly saw you in the first place. Your absence becomes a mirror reflecting their own lack of awareness, their own complacency, their own failure to value what they assumed would always remain. And as that realization spreads through them, slowly, subtly, inevitably, something else begins to happen, something they are far less prepared for than your silence itself. The real unraveling doesn't begin when you disappear. It begins when they realize that they can no longer read you, no longer predict you, no longer reach you in the ways they once depended on. Because once you become unreadable, brother, their entire sense of control begins to collapse, and that collapse is the part they never see coming. Part 3. The psychology of uncertainty, becoming unreadable. Nothing destabilizes a person more than the slow, unsettling realization that they can no longer predict you, that the version of you they once read like a map has vanished, replaced by someone they can't quite grasp, can't quite decode, can't quite pull back into orbit. And when your silence evolves into stillness, real, unmovable stillness, you become unreadable in a way that terrifies them more than any argument ever could. Because silence can be dismissed, but stillness feels like truth. Stillness feels like closure they didn't approve. You used to be easy to access, easy to read, easy to provoke. Your emotions showed up right on time, your reactions were predictable, and your heart, honest and open, made you an emotional landmark in their world. They always knew where you stood, even when they didn't deserve that clarity. But the moment you stop reacting, the moment your expression stops mirroring their expectations, something inside them quietly cracks. Humans fear what they cannot interpret. The mind survives through prediction. And now they cannot interpret you at all. Your unreadability forces them to revisit every assumption they ever built about you. Their certainty decays as internal questions rise in waves. Did I misjudge him? Why isn't he responding? Has something changed? Is he done with me? And these questions echo, not because they need answers, but because the mind hates unanswered questions. It hates emotional puzzles it cannot solve. It hates when the patterns it once depended on suddenly dissolve. You become the biggest unanswered question in their world, not because you intended to, but because you removed the emotional breadcrumbs they once followed to feel in control. This is where the conflict inside them intensifies. They want to reach out, but pride stops them. They want to ignore you, but fear paralyzes them. They want to move on, but curiosity chains them in place. They want clarity, but they no longer have the access to demand it. Instead of fighting with you, they are now fighting with themselves. Your silence becomes the psychological battlefield where their ego, their doubt, their longing, and their insecurity begin to collide. And the agitation that follows is brutal. They refresh the chat expecting something, a message, a mistake, a sign that you still feel what they assumed you always would. They replay your last words, searching for hidden meanings. They imagine conversations that never happened, moments they wished they handled differently, outcomes they believed they controlled. All of this simply because your stillness gives them no emotional foothold. You're not pushing them away, you've simply stopped holding the door open. And here's the beauty of it, the part rooted deeply in Stoic strength. You don't manipulate, you don't retaliate, you don't play games or attempt reverse psychology. You simply remove your emotional availability, the one resource they thought they could access any time without cost. And by doing nothing, absolutely nothing, you shift everything. Your unreadability becomes the catalyst for their unraveling. The more indifferent your energy becomes, the more intensely their mind tries to chase the version of you they once controlled. In the past, your emotional transparency made their world feel secure. Now, your calm makes their world feel unstable. Your silence once looked like distance. Now it looks like transformation. And transformation, brother, is the one thing they cannot predict, cannot control, cannot reverse. Suddenly, they wonder if the door they assumed would always remain open has quietly closed. If the heart they treated casually has learned to beat in a new rhythm, one that no longer matches theirs. If the man they believed they could keep on emotional standby has stepped into an identity they can no longer influence. This is the part where they realize they no longer know you. And that realization does not free them. It traps them. Because once your grasp on them slips, their grasp on themselves weakens too. And here's the twist they never expect. When their control dissolves, rejection flips. and becomes the source of your inner strength. The unreadability that terrifies them is the very thing that liberates you, because once you master the art of being unreadable, brother, their power over your emotions disappears forever, and that is when the transformation inside you begins to take form, the transformation that turns rejection into resilience. Part 4. The internal break. When rejection becomes strength. Rejection feels fatal the first time it hits you. It lands like a blow to the chest, a collapse inside your ribcage, a verdict you were never prepared to hear. You tell yourself it means you weren't enough, not attractive enough, not important enough, not worthy enough. But here's the truth. Nobody told you when you needed it most. Rejection is rarely about you. It exposes the limits of the person who failed to choose you, not the limits of your worth. It reveals where their courage ends, not where your value does. You've lived through the nights when you begged the past to make sense, when you replayed conversations until they blurred, when you searched for reasons inside a story that was already over. You gave more love than the situation deserved. You over-explained, over-invested, overextended, hoping that if you poured enough effort into something broken, it might suddenly become whole. You thought consistency could overcome incompatibility, that devotion could bridge emotional distance, that showing up could replace being chosen. But every rejection contains a truth most people avoid. You cannot save a connection by sacrificing yourself. The conflict grows sharper when your heart still wants them, but your soul knows you can't stay. That's the war no one sees, the war between longing and self-respect. You feel torn between the comfort of familiarity and the cost of staying where you are unseen, between the desire to fix something and the knowledge that you're the only one fighting for it. And this tension slowly carves you open. It breaks you in ways that feel cruel but necessary. Then one day, quietly, without announcement or drama, something inside you snaps into place, a small but irreversible shift, a painful clarity, a clean break. You stop chasing the person who benefits from your wounds. You stop begging for clarity from someone who thrives in your confusion. You stop bleeding for someone who would not offer you a bandage. You stop handing over parts of yourself to someone who only knows how to take. And this is where the transformation truly begins. Because rejection, despite how brutal it feels, becomes redirection. Pain becomes instruction. Loss becomes liberation. What once felt like the ending now begins to look like the opening. You start to understand that your strength was never born in the moments they valued you. Your strength was born in the moment you realized you no longer needed their validation to stand tall. You begin to reclaim the pieces of yourself you gave away too cheaply. You learn to sit with your pain instead of escaping it. You learn to breathe again without waiting for someone else to prove your worth. You rise not with arrogance, but with understanding, not with bitterness, but with wisdom, not with revenge, but with alignment. And here's the revelation that shakes everything loose. The moment you rise, something shifts that they can no longer follow. Your evolution leaves them behind, not because they're unworthy of your presence, but because they no longer recognize the man who stands before them, the old version of you, the one who tolerated disrespect, who apologized for having needs, who begged for honesty, dies quietly. And the new version of you is someone they can't reach, can't read, can't pull back into the cycle. Suddenly, they're confronted with the truth they never thought they'd face. You didn't break from the rejection, you broke open. You didn't collapse under the weight. You grew stronger because of it. You didn't lose them. You lost the illusion that they were ever capable of loving you well. And in that realization, you gain everything. Because the moment you stop needing approval, rejection loses its power. The moment you stop chasing, the dynamic resets. The moment you reclaim your self-worth, every emotional pattern that once controlled you dissolves. You rise differently. You speak differently, you choose differently, and the person who once rejected you suddenly finds themselves standing outside the world they used to inhabit with ease. That is the internal break, the fracture that becomes your foundation, the moment when pain stops being a prison and becomes a doorway. And when you walk through it, brother, the evolution that follows is something they will never be able to keep up with. Your transformation is already in motion. Part 5. The evolution they can't follow. Your emotional transformation. They never expect your evolution. They always assume the man they left behind will remain frozen in place, waiting, hoping, wounded but loyal, stuck in the version of himself they learned to control. What they never see coming is the quiet transformation that begins the moment your heart breaks open. Not the loud, dramatic reinvention people post about, but the slow, disciplined rebuilding that happens in silence, in mornings when the world still feels heavy, in nights when you choose not to look back. Because real transformation does not announce itself. It doesn't ask for applause. It doesn't seek permission. It begins as a subtle shift in how you breathe, how you think, how you respond. You stop explaining yourself. You stop chasing answers you already know. You stop editing your emotions to fit inside someone else's comfort. You stop lowering your standards to meet someone who refuses to rise. In the beginning, the change is internal, invisible, but deeply felt. You become the man who watches instead of reacts, who considers instead of collapses, who pauses instead of panics. You start recognizing patterns you once tolerated simply because you were afraid of losing someone who already wasn't choosing you. And this recognition becomes the first crack in the shell of your old identity. You grow quieter, not from pain, but from clarity. You speak less because you finally understand the value of your words. You need less because you've stopped feeding on emotional crumbs. You reach out less because you've stopped reaching backward. The man you're becoming is calmer, sharper, heavier with dignity. Your energy changes, and without realizing it, you begin to rise. Meanwhile, the person who once dismissed you doesn't notice the shift at first. They assume your silence is temporary. They assume the old patterns will return, that you'll reach out again, that your heart still lives in their hands. They confuse your stillness with waiting. They confuse your peace with hesitation. They confuse your distance with a phase. But evolution is not a phase. It is a departure. Over time, your transformation becomes undeniable, not because you announce it, but because your absence vibrates differently. You no longer orbit around their moods. You no longer bend at the slightest sign of affection. You no longer respond to emotional bait. The emotional access they once enjoyed becomes restricted, not out of revenge, but out of maturity. This is when the panic sets in for them. They look for the version of you they remember, the one who overgave, over-apologized, over-loved. But he's gone. They test the waters with subtle messages, familiar patterns, old hooks, but nothing lands. Your calm becomes the boundary they never respected. Your silence becomes the mirror they cannot avoid. Your evolution becomes the wall they cannot climb. And the beauty is this: you didn't evolve to impress them, hurt them, or prove anything. You evolved because staying the same would have cost you your soul. You evolved because pain forced you to see yourself without illusion. You evolved because the man you used to be was built on self-sacrifice, and the man you're becoming is built on self-respect. Your transformation has layers they will never understand. They weren't there for the nights when you held yourself together. They didn't witness the discipline of choosing not to text. They didn't hear the internal voice you had to rebuild from scratch. They didn't feel the weight of choosing peace over familiar chaos. They will never know the courage it took to walk away without clinging to closure that would never come. And here's the truth that stings them the most. You evolved past the version of yourself they knew how to manipulate. The emotional doors they once used to enter your world are locked now, not with anger, but with wisdom. Your heart beats differently, your priorities shift, your identity sharpens. You are no longer accessible in the ways that kept you wounded. They try to follow your evolution, but they can't. because your transformation was born from pain they never had to face. Growth forged in fire cannot be replicated by someone who never stepped into the flames. And so, while they remain tethered to the past, you move toward a future they were never meant to join. Your evolution becomes the quiet distance they cannot cross, the truth they cannot undo, the loss they never expected. And the moment they realize they can't follow you is the moment your calm becomes the breaking point they never saw coming. Part 6. When your calm destroys them. They expect anger from you. They expect collapse. They expect the emotional storm they've always been able to trigger with one cold message or one calculated silence. What they never expect, what they are completely unprepared for, is your calm. Not the calm that hides pain, but the calm that comes after you've walked through fire and realized you no longer burn the same way. At first, they mistake your calm for indifference. They think you're pretending. They assume you're waiting for the right moment to reach out, to defend yourself, to chase what's already gone. But slowly, painfully, they begin to understand. This calm is real. This calm is earned. This calm is the final version of you. The version they spent years believing they could shape but never actually helped build. Because nothing destabilizes a person more than losing the ability to affect you. The moment they speak and your heart doesn't flinch, the dynamic collapses. Every tactic that once worked suddenly becomes powerless. The button they used to push doesn't respond anymore. The emotional strings they once pulled now hang loose in their hands. And that's when the truth hits them. They no longer have influence over your inner world. Your calm does not argue. It does not justify. It does not rush in to ease their guilt or untangle their confusion. Your calm simply stands, unshaken, unmoved, uninterested in returning to the battlefield where you once lost pieces of yourself. This is the moment their ego begins to fracture, because people don't panic when you fight. They panic when you no longer feel the need to. They panic when the war ends without their permission. They panic when silence replaces chaos. They panic when your peace no longer includes them. They check your page, not out of curiosity, but out of fear. They reread old messages, not out of longing, but out of regret. They try subtle provocations, but nothing lands. Your calm has become a mirror reflecting the truth they spent years avoiding. They never had power over you. They only had access. And once you took that access away, the illusion of control shattered. Here's the twist. Your calm does not destroy them out of cruelty. It destroys them because it forces them to confront the version of themselves they hid behind your forgiveness. Your stillness exposes everything their noise once covered. In your silence, they finally see the chaos they brought. In your peace, they finally feel the pain they caused. In your absence, they finally understand the presence they lost. And this is the moment everything flips. Not because you tried to win, but because you finally stopped playing. Your calm becomes the final chapter they never saw coming, the ending they cannot rewrite, the consequence they created but never anticipated. And as they unravel, one question haunts them. If this is who you are now, who will you become next? Which leads directly to the truth they fear most. The truth waiting in the final reveal. Part 7. The end they never expected, walking away without noise. They always imagine the ending will be loud, tears, arguments, emotional fireworks, long explanations, a dramatic scene they can replay later to soothe their ego. They prepare for shouting, for begging, for the familiar version of you who once needed answers more than dignity. What they never expect is silence, a clean exit, a door that simply closes without ceremony. Walking away without noise is not something the unhealed mind can comprehend. They mistake it for coldness. They tell themselves you're being stubborn, dramatic, or trying to punish them. But the truth is far simpler and far more devastating. You walk away quietly because you finally understand there is nothing left to fix, nothing left to prove, and nothing left to salvage. Silence is not your weapon, it's your boundary. You don't need a final conversation to validate your worth. You don't need closure from someone who never respected the opening. You don't need to explain a decision that took you months of internal war to reach. You leave because staying would cost you the man you're becoming. And this is the ending they never saw coming. They always assumed you'd circle back, return to the familiar cycle, reopen the door they kept half closed. They thought your patience was infinite, your devotion permanent, your presence guaranteed. They did not realize that even the kindest men reach a breaking point. And when they do, the break is silent, clean, absolute. Your absence becomes the verdict no words could deliver. Your silence becomes the accountability they never gave themselves. Your distance becomes the mirror they can no longer avoid. They will search for reasons, not to understand you, but to protect their ego. They will rewrite the story in ways that make them feel less responsible. They will convince themselves you left too fast, or that you never cared deeply, or that you're trying to teach them a lesson. But deep down, in the quiet moments they never show anyone, they will feel it. The weight of your departure. Because people who took you for granted always feel your worth the loudest after you're gone. They remember the promises you honored, the support you gave, the emotional safety you offered, and then they realize, too late, that your silence is not emptiness. It is peace reclaiming itself. And here's the most haunting part for them. You didn't walk away to hurt them. You walked away to save yourself. You walked away because you finally understood that your emotional space is sacred, that your heart is not a revolving door, that your presence is not a gift to be wasted. This is where the story flips permanently. You step into a life where your worth is non-negotiable, where your boundaries are firm, where your voice is used with intention, not desperation. You return to yourself in a way that feels like coming home after years of wandering. And as for them, they are left standing in the echo of a goodbye that was never spoken. They replay your silence over and over, trying to decode it, trying to undo it, trying to reopen a door you outgrew. They never understood that people don't leave to be understood. They leave to be free. And freedom, brother, is the one ending they never expected, because it's the only one they cannot follow you into. If you're still here, brother, then something in this message didn't just speak to you, it recognized you. It saw the version of you that's been fighting quietly, healing silently, rising slowly in the dark while no one was watching. Maybe you're in the middle of the silence right now. Maybe you're walking away from someone who never thought you would. Maybe you're finally realizing that the calm you've built is not emptiness, but evolution. And if any part of this journey felt like your story, then hear this clearly. This is not the end. This is the beginning of the man you were always meant to become. The world will never applaud your silence. People will never validate your growth while you're still in the middle of it. But when you walk differently, breathe differently, choose differently, when you rise without noise, the very people who underestimated you will be the first to feel the shift. So before you go, I want you to sit with a question, a real one. What part of your story, the silence, the rejection, the rising, or the walking away, is speaking the loudest to you right now? Share it below in your own words, not for attention, but for clarity, for release, and for the next man who needs to know he's not alone in this. And brother, don't leave yet. The next video I prepared dives even deeper into what happens after you disappear. The psychological shift they feel, the guilt they hide, and the regret they can no longer escape. Click it, start it, and keep walking the path of the man who no longer breaks in the same place he healed. Your evolution has already begun. Now finish it.